What if I told you that most people are unknowingly bleeding money every single day, losing thousands of dollars every year without even realizing it? Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that small, almost invisible financial decisions you've been making have cost you the equivalent of a brand new car, or a dream vacation, or even the down payment on a house. The shocking truth is that the average person loses between 20 to 30% of their income to completely avoidable expenses, poor financial habits, and money management mistakes that seem insignificant in the moment but compound into life-changing amounts over time. Think about this for just a second. If you earn $50,000 a year and you're losing even 20% to these invisible money leaks, that's $10,000 vanishing from your life annually. Over a decade, that's $100,000. Over a working lifetime of 40 years, that's $400,000 that could have transformed your financial future, provided security for your family, or given you the freedom to pursue your passions without the constant weight of financial stress crushing your dreams. But here's the thing that most financial experts won't tell you because they're too busy trying to sell you complicated investment strategies or expensive financial planning services. Saving money isn't actually about deprivation. It's not about eating ramen noodles for every meal, never enjoying a coffee with friends, or living like a monk in a cave. That's the outdated, miserable approach that makes people give up on financial wellness after just a few weeks. The real art of saving money is something entirely different, something almost counterintuitive. It's about understanding the psychology behind your spending, identifying the systems and structures in your life that are designed to separate you from your hard-earned cash, and then strategically redesigning your financial life so that saving money becomes automatic, painless, and even enjoyable. In this comprehensive video, we're going to dive deep into the 10 most powerful principles from the groundbreaking book, The Art of Saving Money, and I'm going to break down each concept in meticulous detail so that you can implement these strategies immediately and start seeing real results in your financial life within the next 30 days. We're not going to skim the surface here. We're going to explore the psychological mechanisms, the practical tactics, the real-world examples, and the step-by-step implementation strategies that separate people who struggle financially from those who build wealth steadily and consistently over time. Before we dive in, I want to ask you for 2 small favors that will actually help you and thousands of other people who need this information. First, hit that subscribe button right now because I'm committed to bringing you this type of deep, actionable, financial content on a regular basis, and subscribing ensures you never miss these transformative insights. Second, and this is really important, click the like button on this video. Now, you might think that's just about boosting my ego or vanity metrics, but here's the real truth. The way YouTube's algorithm works, when you like this video, you're essentially telling the platform that this content is valuable and should be shown to more people. Your like literally helps this video reach someone who might be struggling financially, someone who might be one paycheck away from disaster, someone who desperately needs this information but hasn't found it yet. Your simple click could change someone's financial life, and that's not hyperbole, that's just how these systems work. So please, take that 1 second right now to hit the like button, and let's make sure this reaches everyone who needs it. Now, let's transform your financial life forever. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Psychology of Money. Understanding why we spend. The first and perhaps most crucial principle in mastering the art of saving money is understanding that your financial challenges are not primarily mathematical problems, they're psychological ones. This might sound strange at first, because we've been conditioned to think about money in purely numerical terms, dollars and cents, income and expenses, assets and liabilities. But the revolutionary insight that transforms people's financial lives is recognizing that money is fundamentally emotional, psychological, and deeply intertwined with our identity, our fears, our desires, and our unconscious beliefs about ourselves and the world. Let me explain what I mean by walking you through a scenario that probably feels familiar. Imagine you've had an absolutely terrible day at work. Your boss criticized you in front of your colleagues, you made a mistake on an important project, you feel undervalued and unappreciated, and you're questioning whether you're even good at your job. You leave the office feeling deflated, worthless, and emotionally depleted. On your way home, you pass by your favorite store, and you see something in the window. Maybe a new jacket, a piece of technology, a luxury item you've been eyeing for weeks. Suddenly, you feel a powerful urge to go inside and buy it. Before you even consciously think about it, you've rationalized the purchase. You deserve it after the day you've had. You work hard and should be able to treat yourself. Life is short, and you should enjoy it while you can. Here's what's actually happening in this moment, and understanding this mechanism will revolutionize your relationship with money. Your brain is not actually craving that jacket or that gadget. What your brain is desperately seeking is a chemical hit of dopamine, serotonin, and other feel-good neurotransmitters that will temporarily alleviate the emotional pain you're experiencing. Shopping, and specifically the act of purchasing something new, triggers a powerful neurochemical response in your brain that mimics the effects of addictive substances. For a brief moment, maybe 20 minutes to a few hours, you'll feel better. You'll feel worthy, successful, like you have some control over your life. Then, inevitably, that feeling will fade, often replaced by guilt, regret, and anxiety about the money you just spent, which creates a negative emotional state that makes you vulnerable to the same pattern repeating itself days or weeks later. This is what psychologists call retail therapy. But that term is actually dangerously misleading because it suggests that shopping is a legitimate form of emotional healing when in reality, it's a temporary band-aid that not only fails to address the underlying emotional wound, but actually makes your overall life situation worse by depleting your financial resources. The same psychological mechanism plays out in countless variations throughout our lives. We buy expensive meals when we're lonely, because eating activates pleasure centers and momentarily fills the emotional void. We purchase status symbols when we feel insecure because we unconsciously believe that external validation from others will fix our internal sense of inadequacy. We impulse buy during moments of boredom because our brains are seeking stimulation and novelty in an unstimulating environment. The financial services industry, the retail industry, the marketing and advertising industries, they all understand these psychological mechanisms far better than most individuals do, and they've built trillion-dollar empires by deliberately exploiting these vulnerabilities. Every single advertisement you see is carefully engineered by teams of psychologists, neuroscientists, and behavioral economists whose entire job is to trigger these unconscious emotional responses and create associations between their products and the feelings you desperately want to experience. They're not selling you a car, they're selling you the feeling of freedom and adventure. They're not selling you a luxury watch, they're selling you the feeling of success and accomplishment. They're not selling you fast food, they're selling you comfort, nostalgia, and the temporary relief from life's stresses. So how do we counteract these powerful psychological forces? The first step is developing what psychologists call metacognition, which is essentially thinking about your thinking, becoming aware of your mental and emotional processes as they're happening in real time. This requires practice and intentionality, but it's absolutely learnable. The next time you feel a powerful urge to make an unplanned purchase, I want you to pause and ask yourself a series of specific questions. What am I actually feeling right now underneath the desire for this object? Am I feeling sad, lonely, anxious, inadequate, bored, angry, or some other uncomfortable emotion? What happened in the hours or days before this urge arose? Did I have a difficult interaction, receive bad news, experience a disappointment, or feel rejected or criticized? What am I actually hoping this purchase will do for me emotionally? What feeling am I trying to create, or what feeling am I trying to escape? When you start asking these questions consistently, something remarkable happens. You begin to notice patterns. You might discover that you always want to shop after difficult conversations with your mother. You might realize that you impulse buy every Sunday evening because you're dreading the upcoming work week. You might notice that your spending spikes during periods when you're feeling lonely or isolated. Once you've identified these patterns, you can start developing alternative strategies for addressing the underlying emotional needs without destroying your financial health. For example, if you notice that you shop when you're feeling lonely, you can create a pre-planned list of alternative activities that genuinely address loneliness, like calling a friend, going to a community event, volunteering, or joining a group centered around an interest or hobby. If you notice that you spend money when you're anxious, you can develop a toolkit of anxiety reduction techniques like deep breathing exercises, physical movement, journaling, or meditation that actually address the root cause rather than temporarily masking it with a purchase. The second critical psychological principle is understanding the concept of decision fatigue and how it sabotages your financial discipline. Your brain has a limited amount of decision-making energy each day, and every single choice you make, from what to wear to what to eat to how to respond to an email, depletes this finite resource. By the end of a long day filled with hundreds of small decisions, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making and impulse control, is essentially exhausted. This is precisely when you're most vulnerable to poor financial choices, impulsive purchases, and expensive convenience decisions like ordering takeout instead of cooking the meal you planned. The solution to decision fatigue in the context of money management is to reduce the number of financial decisions you need to make through automation and pre-commitment strategies. Instead of deciding whether to save money every time you get paid, you automate transfers so the money moves into savings before you even see it in your checking account. Instead of deciding whether to pack lunch every single morning when you're tired and rushed, you prepare meals on Sunday so that the decision is already made. Instead of debating whether you can afford a purchase every time something catches your eye, you create clear spending rules in advance that remove the need for in-the-moment deliberation. The third psychological principle that profoundly impacts your saving ability is the concept of present bias, which is the tendency for people to value immediate rewards much more highly than future rewards, even when the future rewards are objectively more valuable. If I offer you $100 today or $120 in a year, most people will take the $100 today, even though waiting would give them a 20% return, which is better than almost any investment you could make. This bias is hardwired into our brains because for most of human evolutionary history, the future was deeply uncertain and immediate resources were essential for survival. However, in the modern world, where most of us have reasonable certainty about our continued existence and access to resources, present bias becomes a significant obstacle to building wealth and financial security. Every time you choose immediate gratification through spending today instead of investing in your future security and freedom, you're allowing this ancient evolutionary wiring to sabotage your long-term well-being. The way to overcome present bias is to make the future feel more real and immediate by creating vivid mental images of your future self and the life you're building. This might sound abstract, but research shows it's remarkably effective. Spend time visualizing in concrete detail what your life will look like when you've built financial security. What does your day look like when you're not stressed about money? How does it feel to go to sleep knowing you have 6 months of expenses saved? What opportunities become available when you have investment income? What would you do with your time if you didn't have to work out of financial desperation? The more real and emotionally resonant you can make these future visions, the more they'll compete with immediate gratification in your decision-making process. Understanding these psychological mechanisms, metacognition, decision fatigue, and present bias, forms the essential foundation for everything else we're going to discuss in this comprehensive guide to saving money. Without this psychological awareness, all the tactical tips and practical strategies in the world will fail, because you'll be fighting against unconscious forces you don't even know exist. With this awareness, you suddenly have access to leverage points that can transform your financial behavior with surprisingly little willpower or struggle. You're not just changing your spending habits. You're fundamentally restructuring your relationship with money at the deepest psychological level. And that's what creates lasting transformation rather than temporary improvement. Chapter 2. The Invisible Money Leaks. Identifying where your money actually goes. Now that we understand the psychological foundations of our spending behavior, we need to confront an uncomfortable truth that most people actively avoid because it's genuinely shocking when you first see it clearly. The vast majority of people have absolutely no accurate idea where their money actually goes. They have a general sense of their big expenses like rent or mortgage, car payments, and maybe some subscription services, but they're operating under a massive blind spot when it comes to the hundreds of small, medium, and recurring expenses that collectively drain far more money than they realize. This phenomenon is so universal and so damaging to financial health that it deserves its own dedicated examination. Let me give you a real-world example that illustrates just how profound this blind spot can be. Several years ago, a financial counselor was working with a couple who earned a combined income of $90,000 per year, which in their area should have been more than sufficient for a comfortable life with plenty left over for savings. Yet they came to the counselor in crisis, living paycheck to paycheck with virtually no savings, mounting credit card debt, and no understanding of why they couldn't make their income work. The counselor asked them to estimate their monthly expenses before looking at any actual numbers. The couple genuinely believed they spent about $2,500 per month on variable expenses beyond their fixed costs like housing and insurance. When they actually tracked every single expense for 30 days and reviewed their bank and credit card statements for the previous 6 months, they discovered something absolutely staggering. Their average monthly spending on variable expenses was not $2,500, it was $6,200. They were off by almost $3,700 per month. That's not a small estimation error. That's losing track of $44,400 per year in spending they weren't even consciously aware of. Where was all that money going? It wasn't going to obvious luxuries or extravagant purchases. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was the coffee shop visits that seemed like $3 or $4, but were actually happening twice a day, 6 days a week, adding up to over $2,000 per year. It was the streaming services they'd signed up for and forgotten about, collectively costing $85 per month. It was the convenience of food delivery and takeout that felt like an occasional indulgence, but was actually happening 4 or 5 times per week at an average of $40 per order, totaling nearly $9,000 annually. It was the impulse purchases at Target where they went in for one item and left with $75 worth of stuff they didn't plan to buy. It was the subscription boxes they'd been excited about initially, but now just accumulated unopened. It was the gym membership they'd never used, the premium cell phone plan with features they didn't need, the extended warranties and insurance products they'd been sold at various stores. This is what financial experts call invisible money leaks, and they are called invisible precisely because they operate below the level of conscious awareness. Each individual expense seems too small to matter, too insignificant to track, too trivial to worry about. But here's the mathematical reality that most people fail to grasp until it's spelled out explicitly. If you spend an extra $5 per day on things you don't consciously track or value, that's $150 per month, which is $1,800 per year, which over 30 years at a modest 7% investment return becomes approximately $170,000 in lost wealth, building opportunity. That $5 a day habit doesn't feel significant in the moment, but it's literally costing you the equivalent of a house down payment or a comfortable retirement cushion over time. The process of identifying your invisible money leaks requires a systematic approach that most people resist because it feels tedious and time-consuming. But I cannot overstate how transformative this exercise is for virtually everyone who actually does it thoroughly. Here's the comprehensive process I want you to follow, and yes, it will take several hours of your time, but those hours will be among the most financially valuable you've ever spent. Step 1 is gathering all your financial statements from the past 3 months, including every bank account, every credit card, every payment like Venmo or PayPal, every digital wallet, and yes, even your cash spending if you track it at all. The reason we need 3 months rather than just 1 is that spending patterns vary significantly from month to month, and we need to see the full picture, including irregular expenses that might not show up in a single month. Step 2 is categorizing every single transaction. This is where people usually want to take shortcuts, but shortcuts here defeat the entire purpose. You need to go line by line through every transaction and assign it to a category. Chapter 3: The Power of Automation, Making Saving Effortless and Inevitable. The third transformative principle in mastering the art of saving money is understanding and implementing the power of automation, which is perhaps the single most effective strategy for overcoming the psychological barriers and behavioral inconsistencies that sabotage most people's financial goals. The fundamental insight here is deceptively simple, but profoundly powerful. The less you have to actively think about and manually execute your saving strategy, the more successful you'll be at actually saving money consistently over the long term. Let me explain why this is true by revisiting the concept of willpower and decision fatigue that we discussed in Chapter 1. Traditional financial advice treats saving money as primarily a willpower challenge, suggesting that if you just had more discipline, more self-control, more commitment to your goals, you would naturally save more money. This approach fails spectacularly for the vast majority of people because it fundamentally misunderstands how human psychology and behavior actually work in the real world. Willpower is not a stable character trait that you either have or don't have. It's a limited mental resource that depletes throughout the day and varies dramatically based on your stress levels, your emotional state, your physical health, how well you slept, and countless other factors. Relying on willpower to save money means that your financial future depends on you making the right decision, the disciplined decision, every single day, multiple times per day, regardless of how tired you are, how stressed you feel, what emergencies or disruptions occur in your life, or what temptations you encounter. This is setting yourself up for failure because human beings, even the most disciplined among us, are fundamentally inconsistent in our decision-making, especially when it comes to choices between immediate gratification and delayed rewards. Automation solves this problem by removing the decision entirely. Instead of requiring you to consciously choose to save money from every paycheck, automation makes saving money the default outcome that happens unless you actively intervene to prevent it. This completely flips the psychological dynamic from requiring willpower to save to requiring willpower to not save, and that subtle shift creates radically different results. Let's walk through the comprehensive automation strategy that will transform your saving behavior, starting with the most fundamental layer and building up to more sophisticated applications. The foundational automation that everyone should implement immediately is automatic savings transfers from your checking account to a dedicated savings account. Here's exactly how to set this up for maximum effectiveness. First, you need to determine the appropriate amount to save automatically. If you've completed the money leak analysis from Chapter 2, you have a clear picture of your actual spending and can identify how much you can realistically save without creating financial stress. For most people, a good starting point is 10 to 15% of your take-home income, though if you have debt or are playing catch-up on savings, you might start with 5% and increase it over time. The critical principle is that the amount needs to be significant enough to actually matter for your financial goals, but not so aggressive that you'll need to reverse the automation frequently because you don't have enough money in checking to cover your regular expenses. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, you need to time the automatic transfer to happen on the same day or the day after your paycheck deposits into your account. This is what financial psychologists call paying yourself first. And it's not just a catchy slogan, it's a strategic implementation of loss aversion psychology. When the money moves to savings before you see it sitting in your checking account and mentally allocate it to various spending purposes, it doesn't feel like you're losing something or depriving yourself. It simply never enters your available spending money in the first place. However, if you wait until the middle or end of your pay period to transfer money to savings, you've already mentally spent that money multiple times, and moving it feels like a painful loss rather than an automatic process. Third, the savings account where your automated transfers go needs to be somewhat inconvenient to access, creating what behavioral economists call friction that makes impulsive withdrawals less likely. This doesn't mean the money should be completely inaccessible for genuine emergencies, but it should require enough extra steps, perhaps logging into a different bank's website, waiting a day or two for transfers to complete, or physically going to a branch, that you won't casually raid your savings for non-essential purchases. Many people find it effective to keep their savings at a completely different bank from their primary checking account, specifically to create this helpful friction. Now let's move beyond basic savings automation to more sophisticated applications that address different financial goals. One of the most powerful automation strategies is what's called the bucket system, where you have multiple automated transfers going to different savings accounts designated for specific purposes. Instead of one undifferentiated pile of savings that gets used for whatever comes up first, you create separate buckets for the emergency fund. Short-term goals like a vacation or new furniture, medium-term goals like a down payment on a house, and long-term goals like retirement or children's education. Here's why this bucket system is psychologically powerful. When you have one general savings account and you need money for something, whether it's a true emergency or just something you want, it's easy to justify withdrawing it because all the money is mixed together and there's no clear consequence to using it. However, when you have clearly labelled buckets and you need to take money from your car replacement fund to pay for a vacation, or from your house down payment fund to buy new clothes, the psychological cost becomes much more visible and real. You're not just spending money, you're actively choosing to delay or sacrifice one goal to fund something else, and that friction often causes you to reconsider whether the purchase is really worth it. The automation process for the bucket system works like this. On the day after your paycheck deposits, multiple automatic transfers execute, each sending a predetermined amount to its designated bucket. Maybe $50 goes to your vacation fund, $100 goes to your emergency fund until it reaches 6 months of expenses, $200 goes to your house down payment fund, and $150 goes to your retirement investment account. These transfers happen without any input from you, and suddenly you're making meaningful progress toward multiple financial goals simultaneously without relying on discipline or willpower. Another critical area for automation is bill payments, and this goes beyond just convenience to actually saving you significant money. Late payment fees on credit cards, utilities, loans, and other bills can easily cost $50 to $100 per year or more if you occasionally forget or miss due dates, which happens to even organized people during busy or stressful periods. Beyond the direct cost of late fees, late payments can negatively impact your credit score, which then cost you money through higher interest rates on future loans, higher insurance premiums, and even lost employment opportunities since many employers now check credit reports. Setting up automatic minimum payments on all bills eliminates this entirely, ensuring you never pay late fees or damage your credit through forgetfulness. However, there's an important nuance with automated bill payments that many people miss. For fixed bills where the amount is the same every month, like many insurance payments, loan payments, or subscription services, full automation is perfect. But for variable bills like credit cards or utilities, you need to decide whether to automate the minimum payment, a fixed amount that is higher than the minimum, or the full balance. The right choice depends on your cash flow consistency and your spending behavior. If you have stable income and predictable spending, automating full credit card balance payments is ideal because it prevents interest charges and forced savings discipline. If your income or expenses vary significantly month to month, automating the minimum payment while manually paying more when you're able provides protection against late fees while maintaining flexibility. Now let's talk about one of the most sophisticated and powerful automation strategies that most people never implement: automating your investment contributions for long-term wealth building. This goes beyond just saving money in a savings account to actually putting your money to work growing through compound returns over time. The simplest and most accessible version of this is maximizing your employer's retirement plan match if you have access to one. This is genuinely free money, yet incredibly, about 1/3 of people who have access to employer matches don't contribute enough to receive the full match, literally leaving thousands of dollars per year on the table. If your employer offers to match 50 cents on every dollar you contribute up to 6% of your salary, and you're not contributing at least 6%, you're turning down a 50% immediate return on your money, which is impossible to achieve through any other investment. The automation here is straightforward. Update your payroll deductions to contribute enough to get the full match, and that money comes out before you ever see it, making it completely painless. Many employers also offer automatic annual increases to your contribution percentage, which is a brilliant application of the Save the Raise principle we discussed earlier, where each year your contribution increases by 1%, slowly building your savings rate without any noticeable impact on your lifestyle. Beyond employer retirement plans, automating contributions to individual retirement accounts or taxable investment accounts creates a systematic wealth-building process that capitalizes on dollar-cost averaging, where you invest the same amount regularly regardless of market conditions, naturally buying more shares when prices are low and fewer when prices are high. This removes the psychological challenge of trying to time the market and the decision paralysis that causes many people to leave money sitting uninvested in savings accounts earning minimal interest. The final layer of automation that ties everything together is using technology and apps that analyze your spending patterns and automate micro-savings without requiring any conscious effort from you. These apps use algorithms to identify small amounts you won't miss and automatically transfer them to savings. For example, some apps round up every purchase to the nearest dollar and save the difference. So a $3.65 coffee automatically saves 35 cents. others analyze your income and spending patterns and transfer small amounts on days when you have excess cash flow. While each individual transfer might only be a few dollars, they add up to hundreds or even thousands of dollars per year that gets saved with zero effort or awareness. The overarching principle that makes all these automation strategies so effective is that they work with human psychology rather than against it. Instead of requiring you to be a perfect, disciplined financial robot who never makes mistakes or has moments of weakness, automation accepts that you're a real human being with inconsistent willpower, and it builds systems that save money anyway. Chapter 4. The Strategic Spending Framework, Making Every Dollar Count. The fourth fundamental principle in mastering the art of saving money involves a complete paradigm shift in how you approach spending decisions. This isn't about deprivation or saying no to everything you want. Instead, it's about developing what financial experts call a strategic spending framework, which is essentially a systematic method for evaluating every potential purchase against your values, goals, and long-term vision for your life. When you implement this framework correctly, you'll actually feel more freedom and satisfaction with your spending, not less, because every dollar you spend will be intentional and aligned with what truly matters to you. Most people approach spending in one of two dysfunctional extremes. On one end of the spectrum, you have completely unrestrained spending where people buy whatever they want whenever they want it, without any real thought about the consequences or opportunity costs. These individuals often justify their purchases with phrases like, "You only live once," or "I work hard so I deserve to enjoy my money," and they genuinely don't understand why they can never seem to get ahead financially despite earning decent incomes. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are so restrictive and fearful about spending any money that they deprive themselves of reasonable enjoyments and experiences, living in a constant state of anxiety about every single purchase even when they have plenty of money saved. Neither of these approaches leads to genuine financial well-being or life satisfaction. The strategic spending framework offers a middle path that's far more effective and sustainable than either extreme. It starts with a foundational exercise that requires deep self-reflection and honesty. You need to identify your actual core values, not the values you think you should have or the values that sound impressive when you talk about them, but the things that genuinely create meaning, satisfaction, and joy in your real life. This is harder than it sounds because we've been conditioned by advertising, social pressure, and cultural narratives to want things that don't actually align with our authentic values. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. Someone might say they value experiences over material possessions, which sounds enlightened and meaningful, but then their actual spending shows they drop $300 a month on clothes and accessories while claiming they can't afford to take the trips they say they want. Or someone might say family is their top priority, but they work constantly to earn money for expensive purchases while rarely spending quality time with their loved ones. The gap between stated values and revealed values, which are shown through actual spending and time allocation, is where most people's financial dissatisfaction lives. To identify your true values, look at your actual spending from the past 3 months that you analysed in Chapter 2. Which purchases, when you think back on them, genuinely added value to your life and brought you satisfaction beyond the initial moment of buying them? Which purchases do you barely remember making because they were so unmemorable and insignificant? Which purchases do you actively regret because the item sits unused or the experience was disappointing? This historical data reveals your authentic values far more accurately than any abstract reflection about what should matter to you. Once you've identified your core values, the next step is creating clear spending rules that operationalize those values into practical decision-making guidelines. These rules should be specific enough to guide real decisions, but flexible enough to accommodate the complexity of real life. For example, if you discover that you genuinely value learning and personal growth, but you've been spending money on entertainment that doesn't serve that value, you might create a rule like this. Before purchasing any entertainment, whether it's streaming services, books, games, or events, Ask yourself whether this entertainment will teach you something, challenge you intellectually, or help you develop a skill. If not, you need to have a compelling reason to make the purchase anyway. Or if you discover that experiences with friends and family bring you far more lasting satisfaction than material possessions, you might create a spending rule where you're willing to spend freely on activities that involve meaningful time with people you care about, like dinners, trips, or shared hobbies, while implementing much stricter limits on solo purchases of items for yourself. The key is that these rules emerge from your actual values, rather than being imposed by external ideas about what responsible spending should look like. Another critical component of the strategic spending framework is implementing what's called the waiting period rule for all non-essential purchases above a certain dollar threshold. Here's how this works in practice. You decide on an amount, let's say $50, above which you will not make any unplanned purchase immediately. Instead, when you encounter something you want to buy that costs more than $50, you add it to a waiting list with the date you first wanted it and the reason it appealed to you. Then you commit to waiting a specific period of time, with the duration scaling based on the purchase price. For a $50 to $100 item, you might wait 48 hours. For a $100 to $500 item, you might wait 1 week. For items over $500, you might wait 30 days. The psychological mechanism that makes the waiting period rule so effective is fascinating. When you first encounter something you want to buy, your brain is flooded with anticipatory dopamine and excitement about owning the item. This neurochemical state impairs rational decision-making and causes you to overestimate the value and satisfaction the purchase will bring, while underestimating or ignoring the costs and downsides. However, this excited state is temporary, usually fading within hours or days. When the waiting period has passed and you revisit your list, you'll often discover that you don't even want the item anymore, or at least the desire has diminished significantly, allowing you to make a much more rational assessment of whether the purchase aligns with your values and goals. Research on consumer behavior has found that implementing a waiting period eliminates between 60 and 75% of impulse purchases that people would have made immediately. Think about what that means financially. If you currently spend $2,000 per year on impulse purchases, which is conservative for many people, and implementing a waiting period prevents 70% of those purchases, you've just saved $1,400 per year without feeling any deprivation whatsoever, because those were purchases you didn't actually want once the initial excitement wore off. That's $1,400 that can go toward goals you actually care about, creating genuine value in your life rather than being wasted on forgotten impulses. The strategic spending framework also requires developing a sophisticated understanding of opportunity cost, which is one of the most important economic concepts that most people never really internalize in their financial decision-making. Every dollar you spend on one thing is a dollar you can't spend on something else. Every purchase represents not just the immediate cost, but also the future value that money could have created if you had invested it or used it differently. When you become aware of these tactics, you can pause when you notice them being used and ask yourself whether you would still want this purchase if it were presented without the manipulation. Would you want this item if there were no sale or urgency? Would you choose this option if you hadn't been shown the expensive decoy first? Would you care about this product if you didn't know other people were buying it? These questions help you separate genuine value from manufactured desire. The final element of the strategic spending framework is regular review and adjustment. Your values, goals, and life circumstances change over time, which means your spending rules and priorities should evolve as well. Set a quarterly reminder to review your spending from the past 3 months and evaluate whether your actual spending still aligns with your stated values and current goals. Look for categories where you're spending more than you intended or getting less value than expected. Identify new patterns or leaks that have emerged. Celebrate categories where you're spending well and getting great value. This regular review keeps your spending intentional and aligned, rather than allowing it to drift back into unconscious patterns. When you fully implement this strategic spending framework, something remarkable happens. You stop feeling guilty about spending money on things you genuinely value, because you know those purchases are intentional and aligned with your goals. Simultaneously, you stop wasting money on things that don't matter to you, freeing up resources for what does. You develop confidence in your financial decisions because they're based on a clear system rather than moment-to-moment impulses. You experience much less stress and anxiety about money because you're in control rather than feeling controlled by unconscious spending patterns. This is what it means to truly master the art of spending money wisely, and it's an essential foundation for building lasting financial security and freedom. Chapter 5: The Debt Elimination Strategy: Breaking Free from Financial Chains. The fifth crucial principle in mastering the art of saving money addresses what is perhaps the single biggest obstacle preventing millions of people from building wealth and achieving financial freedom: debt. Understanding how to strategically eliminate debt is not just about getting out of a hole, it's about fundamentally transforming your relationship with borrowed money and reclaiming the portion of your income that's currently being diverted to pay for your past spending decisions instead of building your future security. Before we dive into the tactical strategies for eliminating debt, we need to understand why debt is so financially devastating and psychologically draining. When you carry debt, especially high-interest consumer debt like credit cards, you're essentially working for free for a portion of every paycheck. Think about it this way. If you have $10,000 in credit card debt at 18% interest and you're making minimum payments, you're paying approximately $150 per month just in interest charges. That's $150 that buys you absolutely nothing, creates zero value in your life, and simply disappears as the cost of having spent money in the past that you didn't actually have. Over the course of a year, that's $1,800 vanishing into interest payments alone, not even reducing your actual debt balance. But the damage goes far deeper than just the direct financial cost. Debt creates what psychologists call cognitive load, which is the constant background mental burden of knowing you owe money. This cognitive load consumes mental energy that could otherwise be directed toward creative thinking, problem solving, relationship building, or pursuing opportunities. Studies have shown that people carrying significant debt perform worse on cognitive tests, make poorer decisions in other areas of their lives, and experience higher levels of stress hormones that negatively impact both mental and physical health. Debt literally makes you less intelligent and less healthy by consuming psychological resources that your brain needs for optimal functioning. Furthermore, debt severely constrains your options and freedom in life. When you're locked into monthly debt payments, you can't easily change careers to pursue more meaningful work if it pays less initially. You can't take calculated risks on starting a business or pursuing entrepreneurial opportunities. You can't weather unexpected job loss or economic downturns without severe consequences. You can't negotiate effectively with employers because you desperately need every paycheck to keep up with debt obligations. In a very real sense, debt is a form of voluntary servitude where you've sold portions of your future freedom and flexibility in exchange for the ability to consume beyond your means in the past. Now that we understand why eliminating debt is so critical, let's explore the comprehensive strategy for actually doing it effectively. The first decision you need to make is choosing between the two primary debt elimination methods, the avalanche method and the snowball method. Each has distinct advantages, and the right choice depends on your psychological makeup and your specific debt situation. The avalanche method is mathematically optimal and will save you the most money in interest charges over time. This method involves listing all your debts by their interest rate from highest to lowest, then directing all extra payment capacity toward the highest interest debt while making minimum payments on everything else. Once the highest interest debt is eliminated, you roll that entire payment amount onto the next highest interest debt, creating an accelerating avalanche of debt elimination. For example, if you have a credit card at 22% interest, another at 18%, a personal loan at 12% and a car loan at 6%, you would attack the 22% card first regardless of the balance size. The mathematical advantage is clear. You're eliminating the most expensive debt first, which means less of your money goes to interest and more goes to actually reducing principal balances. However, The avalanche method has a significant psychological challenge. If your highest interest debt also happens to be your largest balance, it might take many months or even years before you experience the psychological win of completely eliminating a debt, which can make the process feel endless and demotivating. This is where the snowball method offers a powerful alternative, especially for people who need psychological momentum to stay committed to debt elimination. The snowball method involves listing your debts by balance size from smallest to largest, regardless of interest rate, then attacking the smallest debt first while making minimum payments on everything else. Once the smallest debt is completely eliminated, you roll that payment onto the next smallest debt, creating a snowball effect where your available payment amount grows as each debt disappears. The psychological power of the snowball method cannot be overstated. When you completely eliminate a debt within the first few weeks or months, your brain experiences a significant dopamine hit and a sense of accomplishment that reinforces your commitment to the process. As you knock out each subsequent debt, the victories come faster and faster, creating powerful positive momentum that keeps you motivated through the entire journey. Research by behavioral economists has shown that people using the snowball method are significantly more likely to actually become debt-free compared to those using the avalanche method, even though they pay slightly more in total interest charges because the psychological benefits of quick wins outweigh the mathematical efficiency. So which method should you choose? If you're highly analytical, disciplined, and motivated primarily by mathematical optimization, the avalanche method will save you money and might align better with your personality. However, if you've struggled with debt for a long time, if you need emotional encouragement to stay committed, or if you have several small debts that could be eliminated quickly, the snowball method's psychological advantages make it the better choice for most people. The best debt elimination method is the one you'll actually stick with until you're completely debt-free. Regardless of which method you choose, the next critical step is finding additional money to accelerate your debt payments beyond the minimums. This is where everything we've discussed in previous chapters comes together synergistically. The money you freed up by identifying and closing invisible money leaks in Chapter 2 becomes available for debt elimination. The automated savings you established in Chapter 3 can temporarily be redirected toward debt payoff, with the understanding that once you're debt-free, those automated transfers will build wealth instead of servicing debt. The strategic spending framework from Chapter 4 helps you continuously find more money by eliminating low-value spending and redirecting it toward this high-value goal of financial freedom. Beyond redirecting existing income, you should also seriously consider temporarily increasing your income specifically for debt elimination purposes. This might involve taking on freelance work in your area of expertise, selling items you no longer need or use, picking up a part-time job in the evenings or weekends, or turning a hobby into a side income stream. The key word here is temporarily. You're not committing to working multiple jobs forever. You're making an intense, focused push for a defined period, maybe 6 months to 2 years depending on your debt load, to eliminate this burden from your life permanently. Let me share a powerful real-world example of how this intensive approach transforms lives. A couple in their early 30s had accumulated $68,000 in various debts, including credit cards, a car loan, student loans, and a personal loan they'd taken to consolidate previous debt. They were making minimum payments and felt completely hopeless, calculating that at their current pace it would take them over 20 years to become debt-free. They decided to implement an aggressive debt elimination strategy, combining the snowball method with a temporary but intense income increase. The husband took on freelance consulting work in his professional field on weekends, bringing in an extra $1,000 to $1,500 per month. The wife started a small online business selling handcrafted items, generating an additional $500 to $800 monthly. They simultaneously implemented the strategic spending framework and found another $800 per month by eliminating restaurant meals, subscription services, and unnecessary convenience purchases. Combined with their existing debt payment budget, they were suddenly throwing over $3,000 per month at their debt. The transformation was dramatic. Their smallest debt, a $1,200 credit card, was eliminated in the first month. The psychological boost from that quick win energized them to keep going. Their second debt, a $3,500 credit card, was gone in 6 weeks. Within 18 months of starting this intensive approach, they had eliminated all $68,000 of debt. Yes, those 18 months were challenging and required sacrifice, but they traded 18 months of focused intensity for the rest of their lives being debt-free instead of spending 2 decades slowly grinding away at minimum payments. Another critical element of successful debt elimination is negotiating with your creditors to reduce interest rates, which can dramatically accelerate your progress. Many people don't realize that credit card interest rates are often negotiable, especially if you have a history of on-time payments and you're willing to make the phone call and ask. The conversation is straightforward. You call your credit card company, explain that you're working hard to pay off your balance, and request a lower interest rate. If they refuse, you mention that you've received offers from competing cards with lower rates, and you're considering transferring your balance unless they can match those rates. Credit card companies would often rather reduce your rate than lose you as a customer entirely, and even a reduction from 18% to 12% can save you hundreds or thousands of dollars over the payoff period. If phone negotiation doesn't work, you can explore balance transfer offers where you move high-interest debt to a card offering 0% interest for a promotional period, typically 12 to 18 months. This allows you to direct 100% of your payments toward principal reduction, rather than watching significant portions disappear into interest charges. Just be absolutely certain you understand any balance transfer fees, which typically range from 3 to 5% of the transferred amount, and make sure you have a solid plan to pay off the balance before the promotional period ends and the regular interest rate kicks in. One crucial mindset shift that separates successful debt eliminators from those who stay trapped is understanding that becoming debt-free is not actually the end goal. It's the beginning of wealth building. Every dollar you're currently sending to creditors will become a dollar you can invest in assets that grow in value and generate income once the debt is gone. If you're currently paying $1,000 per month in debt payments and you become debt-free, that's $1,000 per month that can immediately start going into retirement accounts, investment portfolios, or other wealth-building vehicles. Over 20 or 30 years, that same money that was being wasted on interest charges can compound into hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets. This perspective helps you stay motivated during difficult moments in the debt elimination journey, because you're not just escaping a negative situation, you're actively building toward financial abundance and freedom. You're not depriving yourself, you're investing in your future self-security, options, and peace of mind. The final critical component of successful debt elimination is ensuring you never fall back into debt once you've escaped it. This requires addressing the behavioral and systemic issues that created the debt in the first place. If you went into debt because of overspending, driven by emotional needs, you need to develop healthier coping mechanisms for stress, boredom, or inadequacy. If you went into debt because of insufficient emergency savings and unexpected expenses, you need to build that emergency fund immediately after becoming debt-free. If you went into debt because you were trying to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't actually afford, you need to align your lifestyle with your actual income and values. Many people make the mistake of celebrating debt freedom by immediately upgrading their lifestyle, buying things they denied themselves during the debt elimination process, essentially rewarding themselves right back into debt. Instead, the moment you make your final debt payment should be the moment you redirect those payment amounts into automated savings and investment contributions, locking in the financial discipline you developed during debt elimination and channeling it toward wealth building instead. Chapter 6. The Emergency Fund Foundation. Building Your Financial Safety Net. The sixth essential principle in mastering the art of saving money involves creating what financial experts universally recognize as the single most important element of financial security: a fully funded emergency fund. This concept might sound simple or even boring compared to more exciting financial topics like investing in stocks or building passive income streams, but understanding the profound importance of an emergency fund and actually building one represents the difference between financial stability and perpetual financial crisis for the vast majority of people. Let me start by explaining exactly what an emergency fund is, and why it serves as the foundation upon which all other financial success is built. An emergency fund is the dedicated pool of money, typically held in a highly accessible savings account, that exists for one specific purpose: to cover unexpected expenses or income disruptions without forcing you to go into debt, liquidate long-term investments at inopportune times, or derail your financial progress. The standard recommendation that you'll hear from virtually every legitimate financial advisor is that your emergency fund should contain between 3 and 6 months' worth of your essential living expenses, though the right amount for you specifically depends on several factors we'll explore in detail. The reason an emergency fund is so critical, and why it must be your first financial priority even before paying off debt in some cases, or investing for long-term goals, is that life is fundamentally unpredictable, and financial emergencies are not rare exceptions, but inevitable occurrences that everyone will face multiple times throughout their lives. Your car will eventually need a major repair that costs $1,500. Your home's water heater or HVAC system will fail and need replacement. You or a family member will have a medical emergency that results in bills your insurance doesn't fully cover. Your company will go through layoffs or restructuring that eliminates your position. Your roof will develop a leak that requires immediate attention. These are not pessimistic hypotheticals, they are statistical certainties that will happen to you at some point. What determines whether these inevitable emergencies become minor inconveniences or major financial catastrophes that set you back years in your financial journey is whether or not you have an adequate emergency fund in place when they occur. Let me illustrate this with 2 scenarios involving the exact same emergency affecting 2 different people with different levels of financial preparedness, so you can see the dramatic difference an emergency fund makes in real outcomes. Person A has no emergency fund because they've been living paycheck to paycheck, spending everything they earn each month. When their car's transmission fails and the repair costs $2,000, they don't have the cash available to pay for it. They have 3 options, all of them terrible. They can put it on a credit card, adding $2,000 to their existing debt and paying 18% interest on it, which means that $2,000 repair actually costs them several $100s more in interest charges over the months or years it takes to pay off. They can take out a payday loan or other predatory high-interest loan, paying even more extreme interest rates and fees that can turn a $2,000 problem into a $3,000 or $4,000 disaster. Or they can simply not fix the car, which might mean losing their job because they can't get to work, creating an even larger financial catastrophe. Person B has built an emergency fund containing $10,000 in a savings account specifically for situations like this. When their car's transmission fails with the exact same $2,000 repair cost, they simply withdraw $2,000 from their emergency fund, pay for the repair in cash, and continue with their life. There's no debt incurred, no interest charges, no stress about how they'll pay for it, no risk to their employment. This example demonstrates why building an emergency fund must take priority over almost everything else in your financial life. Without this foundation, every unexpected expense becomes a potential disaster that can derail months or years of financial progress. With this foundation, unexpected expenses are manageable bumps in the road that don't fundamentally alter your financial trajectory. Now let's address the critical question of how much money you actually need in your emergency fund. Because this isn't a one-size-fits-all calculation, and getting it wrong in either direction creates problems. If your emergency fund is too small, it won't actually protect you from significant emergencies, giving you false confidence that evaporates the moment a real crisis hits. If your emergency fund is excessively large, you're keeping too much money in low-interest savings accounts when it could be working harder for you in investments or paying down debt, creating an opportunity cost that slows your overall financial progress. The traditional advice of 3 to 6 months of expenses is a reasonable starting point, but you need to adjust the baseline up or down based on your specific circumstances and risk factors. Several key factors should influence the size of your emergency fund target. First, consider your income stability and the strength of your job security. If you work in a highly volatile industry with frequent layoffs, if you're in a specialized field where finding a new position takes longer, if you're self-employed with variable income, or if you're the sole income earner for your household, you need a larger emergency fund, potentially 6 to 12 months of expenses. Conversely, if you have extremely stable employment in an in-demand field, if you have dual incomes in your household, so one person losing their job doesn't eliminate all income, or if you have additional safety nets like family who could help in a crisis, you might be adequately protected with 3 to 4 months of expenses. Second, consider your fixed obligations and how easily you could reduce your expenses in an emergency. If you have high fixed costs like a large mortgage or rent payment, car payments, significant insurance premiums, or other obligations that can't be quickly reduced if you lose your job, you need a larger emergency fund because your essential monthly expenses in a crisis will still be substantial. If you have relatively low fixed costs and significant flexibility to cut discretionary spending in an emergency, a smaller emergency fund provides adequate protection. Third, consider your health status and insurance situation. If you have chronic health conditions that require ongoing treatment and medication, if your health insurance has high deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums, if you have dependents with special medical needs, or if you're in a life stage where medical emergencies are more likely, you should increase your emergency fund to account for potential medical expenses. Healthcare costs are one of the leading causes of financial emergencies in many countries, and having additional cushion specifically for medical situations provides crucial protection. Fourth, consider the condition and age of major assets like your home and vehicles. If you own an older home with aging systems that are likely to need replacement soon, or if you drive an older vehicle that's more prone to mechanical failures, you should increase your emergency fund to accommodate these predictable but uncertain expenses. Some financial advisors actually recommend separating these anticipated major repairs into a different fund from true emergencies, creating what's sometimes called a replacement fund for things like appliances, vehicles, and home systems that have finite lifespans. Once you've determined your target emergency fund amount based on these factors, the next challenge is actually building it, which can feel overwhelming if you're starting from zero and the target is $15,000 or $20,000. The key to success is breaking this large goal into smaller milestones that feel achievable and celebrating progress at each milestone to maintain motivation. Financial experts typically recommend a 3-stage approach to building an emergency fund that balances the urgency of having some protection quickly with the long-term goal of full funding. Stage 1 is establishing a starter emergency fund of $1,000 to $2,000 as quickly as possible, even before paying extra on debt beyond minimum payments in most cases. This starter fund won't protect you from major emergencies like job loss, but it will handle the most common small to medium emergencies like minor car repairs, urgent home repairs, or medical copays without forcing you into debt. You build this starter fund through intense, focused effort over 1 to 3 months by cutting every possible expense temporarily, selling items you don't need, taking on extra work, or using one-time money sources like tax refunds or bonuses. Stage 2 involves a decision point based on your debt situation. If you have high-interest debt like credit cards with rates above 10 or 12%, many financial advisors recommend pausing emergency fund building beyond the starter fund while you attack that debt using the methods we discussed in Chapter 5, because the guaranteed return from eliminating high-interest debt exceeds the value of having a larger emergency fund during that period. However, If you have only low-interest debt or no debt, you proceed directly to building your full emergency fund as your top financial priority. Stage 3 is systematically building from your starter fund to your full target amount through consistent monthly contributions using the automation strategies from Chapter 3. If your target is $15,000 and you already have $2,000 in your starter fund, you need to save $13,000 more. At $200 per month, that takes 65 months, which sounds daunting. At $400 per month, it takes 32 months. At $600 per month, it takes about 22 months. The key psychological principle here is focusing on the monthly target rather than the total, making it feel like a manageable recurring commitment rather than an impossibly large mountain to climb. As your emergency fund grows, you'll experience a profound psychological shift that might be the most valuable benefit beyond the obvious financial protection. The constant low-level anxiety that characterizes life without financial cushion begins to dissipate. You sleep better knowing that a car repair or medical bill won't spiral into a crisis. You feel more confident at work because you're not desperately dependent on every single paycheck, which paradoxically often leads to better job performance and career advancement because you're operating from a position of security rather than fear. You make better decisions in all areas of life because you're not constantly in survival mode, freeing up mental energy for creative thinking and long-term planning. One crucial aspect of emergency fund management that many people get wrong is where to keep the money and how to ensure it remains accessible for emergencies while not being so accessible that you're tempted to raid it for non-emergencies. The ideal emergency fund location balances 3 sometimes competing priorities: safety of principal, meaning you can't lose the money; liquidity, meaning you can access it quickly when needed; and reasonable return so inflation doesn't erode its value too severely over time. The most common and generally recommended location for emergency funds is a high-yield savings account at an online bank, which typically offers interest rates significantly higher than traditional brick-and-mortar banks while still providing FDIC insurance protection and relatively quick access to your funds, usually within 1 to 3 business days for transfers to your checking account. Some people split their emergency fund between an immediately accessible account for true emergencies and a slightly higher yielding but less liquid option, like certificates of deposit with staggered maturity dates for the portion they're less likely to need immediately. Chapter 7: The Income Optimization Revolution: Earning More to Save More. The 7th transformative principle in mastering the art of saving money involves a fundamental shift in perspective that many traditional personal finance approaches completely overlook or minimize. While the previous 6 chapters have focused primarily on the spending side of the financial equation, examining how to spend less, spend more strategically, eliminate debt, and protect yourself from emergencies, this chapter addresses the other side of the equation that often has even more potential for dramatic improvement: your income. The revolutionary insight here is that there is a practical limit to how much you can save by cutting expenses, but there is virtually no limit to how much you can save by increasing your income. And for many people, focusing energy on earning more money produces faster and more substantial results than obsessively trimming every possible expense from an already modest budget. Let me explain why income optimization deserves serious attention and strategic effort, rather than being dismissed as unrealistic or outside your control. Many people operate under a deeply limiting belief that their income is essentially fixed, determined by their job title, their employer's pay scale, their industry standards, or their educational credentials, and that meaningful income increases only come through slow progression over many years, or require going back to school for advanced degrees. This belief is not only incorrect, it's financially devastating because it causes people to accept their current income as immutable fate, rather than recognizing it as one variable among many that they can actively influence and improve through strategic action. The reality, which has been demonstrated by countless real-world examples across every industry and income level, is that your income is far more flexible and controllable than you've been led to believe. Whether you're earning $30,000 per year or $300,000 per year, there are specific, actionable strategies you can implement to increase your income by 10, 20, or even 50% or more within 1 to 3 years. And these income increases compound over your entire career in ways that dwarf the impact of cutting your coffee budget or negotiating lower cable bills. A person who increases their income from $50,000 to $60,000 per year has created an additional $10,000 of annual earning power that will continue and likely grow further throughout their career, representing hundreds of thousands of dollars over a working lifetime, whereas someone who cuts $5,000 from their annual expenses through extreme frugality might struggle to maintain that level of restriction long term and gains no compounding benefit over time. Before we dive into the specific strategies for increasing your income, we need to address a common psychological barrier that prevents many people from even attempting to earn more. There's often guilt or discomfort around wanting to make more money, as if focusing on income is somehow greedy, materialistic, or morally questionable. This mindset is not only financially limiting, it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what money actually represents and what earning more money enables you to do. Money is simply a tool that expands your options and your ability to create positive impact in your life and the lives of others. When you earn more money, you can save more and build security for yourself and your family, eliminating the stress and limitation that financial insecurity creates. You can give more to causes and people you care about, making a real difference in areas that matter to you. You can invest in your own development, health, and growth. You can create opportunities and experiences that enrich your life and the lives of people around you. Earning more money is not about greed or materialism. It's about expanding your capacity to live according to your values and make the contributions you want to make in the world. Now, let's explore the comprehensive strategies for actually increasing your income, starting with optimizing your primary employment income, which for most people represents the largest and most reliable income stream. The first strategy, which is simultaneously one of the most effective and most underutilized, is simply asking for a raise at your current job using a strategic approach that significantly increases your chances of success. Research shows that a substantial majority of employees never ask for raises beyond the standard annual cost of living adjustments their employers might provide, essentially leaving thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on the table over their careers because they're uncomfortable with the conversation or assume the answer will be no. The key to successfully negotiating a raise is understanding that you're not asking for charity or for your employer to like you more. You're making a business case that paying you more money is in the company's best interest because of the value you create. This requires preparation and evidence gathering before the conversation ever happens. You need to document your specific contributions and achievements over the past year, quantifying the value you've created wherever possible. Did you increase sales, improve efficiency, solve problems, take on additional responsibilities, develop new skills, or contribute to successful projects? Write down concrete examples with numbers attached. If you increase sales, by what percentage or dollar amount? If you improved a process, how much time or money did it save? If you took on new responsibilities, what would it cost to hire someone else to do that work? You also need to research what people in similar roles at other companies are earning in your geographic area and industry. Using resources like salary surveys, industry reports, and websites that aggregate compensation data. This market research gives you objective evidence that your current compensation is below market rate if that's the case, which is a compelling argument that has nothing to do with whether you need more money or deserve it based on tenure, but rather demonstrates that the company risks losing you to competitors who will pay market rates. When you enter the raise conversation armed with documented value creation and market research, you're having a professional business discussion rather than an emotional plea, and you dramatically increase your likelihood of success. The conversation itself should be as scheduled formally as a meeting with your manager specifically to discuss your compensation, not raised awkwardly at the end of another meeting or in passing. You present your case clearly and confidently, emphasizing the value you've created for the organization and the market data showing that your compensation is below industry standards for someone with your skills and contributions. You state a specific number or range you're requesting, typically 10 to 20% above your current salary if you have strong justification, and then you stop talking and wait for a response. Many people undermine their negotiation by filling the silence with backtracking, apologizing, or reducing their request before the other person has even responded. State your case, make your request, and then allow your manager time to process and respond. Even if your manager cannot immediately approve a raise, the conversation often opens possibilities you didn't know existed, like performance bonuses tied to specific goals, additional benefits or perks that have monetary value, promises of raises at specific future dates, contingent on continued performance, or promotions to higher level positions with corresponding pay increases. The worst case scenario is that they say no, and you have information about whether you're valued at that organization or should begin looking elsewhere, which is valuable information in itself. The second income optimization strategy involves actively seeking promotions or lateral moves to higher paying positions within your current company or industry. Many people passively wait to be noticed and promoted based on good performance, but this approach is far less effective than proactively positioning yourself for advancement. This requires understanding what skills, experience, and credentials are required for the next level position you're targeting, and then systematically acquiring those qualifications while making your ambitions known to decision makers. You volunteer for visibility projects that showcase your capabilities. You seek out mentorship from people in the roles you're targeting. You ask explicitly about what you would need to demonstrate to be considered for advancement. You document your expanding skill set and accomplishments. When opportunities arise, you apply and make your case rather than assuming you're not ready or won't be selected. The third strategy is considering a strategic job change to a different employer, which statistically results in larger pay increases than staying with the same employer over time. Research consistently shows that people who change jobs every 3 to 5 years earn significantly more over their careers than people who stay in one place for decades, often receiving pay bumps of 15 to 30% or more with each move, while those who stay at one company typically receive annual raises of 3 to 5%. This doesn't mean you should job hop recklessly without regard for other factors like job satisfaction, learning opportunities, work-life balance, or company culture, but it does mean you should periodically assess your market value and be willing to move if you're significantly underpaid relative to what you could earn elsewhere. Chapter 8. The Frugal Living Mastery, Smart Spending Without Sacrifice. The eighth fundamental principle in mastering the art of saving money involves understanding and implementing what true frugal living actually means, which is dramatically different from the deprivation-focused approach that most people imagine when they hear the word frugal. This chapter will transform your understanding of frugality from something negative, restrictive, and joyless into something positive, empowering, and actually more satisfying than the unconscious consumption patterns that most people follow. The essence of frugal living mastery is learning to maximize the value you extract from every dollar you spend while minimizing waste, inefficiency, and spending on things that don't genuinely improve your life, which paradoxically often results in a higher quality of life than people achieve by spending far more money without strategic intention. The first critical distinction we need to establish is the difference between being cheap and being frugal, because these are fundamentally different approaches that produce completely different results in both financial outcomes and life satisfaction. Being cheap means making decisions based solely on minimizing immediate monetary cost without regard for quality, value, longevity, or the broader implications of those decisions. A cheap person buys the absolute lowest price option for everything, regardless of whether that option actually serves their needs well or will need to be replaced quickly. They inconvenience others to save small amounts of money. They sacrifice significant value, quality, or relationships to avoid spending. They focus obsessively on the price tag while ignoring the actual value proposition. This approach actually often costs more money in the long run and creates unnecessary stress, frustration, and damaged relationships. Being frugal, in contrast, means making thoughtful decisions that optimize for value, which is the relationship between what something costs and what benefit it provides over its useful life. A frugal person is willing to pay more upfront for higher quality items that will last longer and perform better, recognizing that the cost per use over time is actually lower than buying cheap items repeatedly. They invest time and effort to find the best value rather than just the lowest price. They prioritize spending on things that genuinely matter to them while cutting ruthlessly on things that don't. They seek creative solutions that provide similar or better outcomes at lower cost. They understand that true economy is about getting maximum value from resources, not just minimizing expenditure at all costs. This approach consistently produces better financial outcomes and higher life satisfaction because it's based on intelligent optimization rather than blind restriction. Let me illustrate this distinction with a concrete example that demonstrates the financial mathematics of value-based thinking versus price-based thinking. Consider someone who needs work shoes and has two options available. Option 1 is a pair of cheap shoes that cost $40 but are poorly constructed and will wear out within 6 months, requiring replacement. Option 2 is a pair of high-quality shoes that cost $120 but are well constructed from durable materials and will last for 3 years with proper care. The cheap person sees the $40 price tag and the $120 price tag and automatically chooses the cheaper option, congratulating themselves on saving $80. However, let's examine the actual economics over a 3-year period. With the cheap shoes at $40 every 6 months, this person will purchase shoes 6 times over 3 years, spending a total of $240. With the quality shoes at $120 that last the full 3 years, the total spending is $120. The person who chose the cheaper option actually has spent twice as much money over the same period, while also experiencing the inconvenience of shopping for shoes 6 times instead of once, and likely dealing with uncomfortable, poorly performing shoes throughout. This is the fundamental mathematics that explains why frugal thinking, focused on value, produces better outcomes than cheap thinking, focused solely on initial price. Now let's explore the comprehensive strategies for implementing frugal living mastery across all major spending categories in your life, starting with one of the largest expenses for most people, housing costs. The conventional wisdom suggests that you should spend approximately 30% of your gross income on housing. But this conventional wisdom often leads people to stretch their budgets to the maximum of what lenders will approve, rather than optimizing for actual value and financial health. A more frugal approach involves questioning whether you can achieve your core housing needs, which are safety, comfort, and reasonable proximity to work and important activities, while spending significantly less than the conventional 30%, perhaps 20 or 25%, and using the difference to build wealth or achieve other important financial goals. This might mean choosing a slightly smaller home or apartment than you could technically afford, selecting a location that's less trendy but still safe and functional, having roommates to share costs if you're single, or being willing to sacrifice some luxury features that don't actually impact your day-to-day quality of life significantly. The key question is identifying your actual housing priorities versus the features you've been conditioned to want by marketing, social pressure, or unrealistic lifestyle media. Do you actually need that extra bedroom that will sit empty except when guests visit twice a year? Or could you accommodate occasional guests differently and save hundreds of dollars monthly? Do you actually use the premium amenities in that luxury apartment complex? Or are you paying for a lifestyle image rather than genuine value? Another powerful frugal housing strategy that many people overlook is negotiating your rent, which most tenants never attempt because they assume rental prices are fixed and non-negotiable. In reality, landlords often have flexibility, especially if you're a good tenant with a history of on-time payments and proper property care, and especially in markets where vacancy rates are rising, or at times of year when finding new tenants is more difficult. If you've been a reliable tenant for a year or more, you can approach your landlord several months before your lease renewal and make a case for a rent reduction, or at least freezing the rent rather than accepting an increase. You emphasize your reliability as a tenant, the cost and hassle they would face finding and screening a new tenant, the risk of vacancy periods, and the market conditions if they support your case. Even a $50 or $100 monthly reduction represents $600 to $1,200 in annual savings, which is substantial money that can be redirected toward your financial goals. The second major spending category where frugal living mastery produces dramatic results is food, which typically represents 10 to 15% of household budgets, but can be optimized significantly without sacrificing nutrition or enjoyment. The foundation of frugal food spending is preparing most of your meals at home, rather than relying on restaurants, takeout, or heavily processed convenience foods, which typically cost 3 to 5 times more than equivalent home-prepared meals. However, the key to making home cooking sustainable rather than a temporary burst of enthusiasm that fades after a few weeks is implementing systems that make it genuinely convenient rather than burdensome. This starts with meal planning, which is the process of deciding in advance what you'll eat for the week, creating a shopping list based on those planned meals, and doing 1 or 2 major shopping trips rather than multiple small trips where you're more likely to make impulse purchases. When you plan meals in advance, you can design them around ingredients that are on sale that week, reducing your per meal cost. You can plan meals that use overlapping ingredients, reducing waste from items that go bad before you use them. You can batch cook components or entire meals on weekends when you have more time, so that healthy, affordable meals are as convenient as ordering takeout during busy weekdays. You eliminate the decision fatigue and last-minute stress of figuring out what to eat when you're already hungry and tired, which is precisely when people make expensive, unhealthy food choices. Let me walk through a detailed example of how strategic meal planning and preparation translates into substantial savings. A typical family of 4 might spend approximately $800 to $1,200 monthly on food if they eat out frequently and shop without planning, perhaps 3 or 4 restaurant meals per week at $40 to $60 each, plus unplanned grocery shopping that results in impulse purchases and waste. By implementing a meal planning system where they prepare a weekly menu, shop with a list, batch cook on Sundays, and limit restaurant meals to 1 special dinner per week, that same family can often reduce their food spending to $400 to $600 monthly, while actually eating healthier, more varied and more delicious food because they have time to prepare dishes properly, rather than rushing or settling for whatever is quick. That's a savings of $400 to $600 per month, which is $4,800 to $7,200 annually, which over 10 years at a modest 7% investment return becomes approximately $66,000 to $99,000. This is not a trivial lifestyle change we're discussing. This is a fundamental transformation in financial trajectory achieved through one category of spending optimization, and it doesn't require eating unpleasant food or never enjoying restaurants. It simply requires being strategic and intentional rather than defaulting to expensive convenience. The third major area for frugal living mastery is transportation, which for many people represents their second largest expense after housing. The conventional approach to transportation involves buying or leasing a new or nearly new vehicle, financing it with a loan, paying full insurance coverage, and replacing it every few years to avoid higher maintenance costs on older vehicles. This approach maximizes convenience and minimizes the risk of breakdowns, but it also represents one of the most expensive possible ways to meet your transportation needs, often costing $600 to $1,000 or more monthly, when you combine payments, insurance, fuel, and maintenance. A frugal approach to transportation starts with questioning whether you actually need a personal vehicle at all, or whether your transportation needs could be met through some combination of public transit, bicycling, walking, and occasional car sharing or ride services for situations where those primary methods don't work. In urban areas with good public transportation, many people discover that the annual cost of a transit pass, perhaps $1,200, plus occasional ride service use for situations where transit doesn't work well, perhaps another $600 annually, totals $1,800 per year compared to $8,000 to $15,000 annually for owning a vehicle. That's a difference of $6,000 to $13,000 per year that can be redirected toward financial goals, and it often comes with additional benefits like built-in exercise from walking to transit stops, reduced stress from not dealing with traffic and parking, and environmental benefits. If you do need a personal vehicle because you live in an area without adequate public transportation or have family or work situations that require it, the frugal approach involves buying a reliable used vehicle, typically 3 to 6 years old, in cash or with minimal financing, and maintaining it properly so it lasts 10 to 15 years or longer. The sweet spot for value in the used car market is typically vehicles that are 3 to 5 years old, where the initial depreciation has already occurred, so you're not losing thousands of dollars in value the moment you drive off the lot. But the vehicle is still modern enough to have current safety features and reliability, and new enough that it shouldn't require major repairs for several years if you choose wisely and maintain it properly. Research consistently shows that the most economical vehicles to own over their lifetime are reliable brands known for longevity, like certain Toyota, Honda, or Mazda models, purchased used at 3 to 5 years old, maintained according to the manufacturer's schedule, and driven until they reach 200,000 miles or more. This approach typically costs less than half what the conventional new car every few years approach costs, with the difference representing tens of thousands of dollars over a decade that can transform your financial situation. The fourth major category for frugal optimization is entertainment and leisure, which many people believe requires significant spending to enjoy life, when in reality some of the most satisfying leisure activities cost little or nothing. The key insight is recognizing that entertainment value is not directly correlated with money spent. A $500 weekend at a resort might provide less actual enjoyment and memorable experience than a $50 camping trip or a free afternoon hiking in nature with friends, depending on your genuine preferences rather than what advertising tells you should be enjoyable. Frugal entertainment mastery involves identifying free or low-cost activities that genuinely align with your interests and values, then prioritizing those over expensive commercial entertainment that often delivers less satisfaction. This might include utilizing public libraries for free books, movies, and increasingly even streaming service access and tool lending. It includes taking advantage of free community events, concerts, festivals, and activities that exist in virtually every community, but that many people never explore. It includes outdoor recreation like hiking, cycling, or park visits that provide physical activity, stress relief, and often social connection at minimal cost. It includes developing hobbies and skills that generate their own satisfaction rather than consuming purchased entertainment passively. Chapter 9. The Investment Mindset, Making Your Money Work for You. The ninth essential principle in mastering the art of saving money represents a profound shift from defensive financial strategies focused on preserving what you have to offensive strategies focused on growing your wealth exponentially over time. This is the transition from simply saving money in accounts, where it sits relatively static, to investing money in assets that generate returns, compound over time, and ultimately create the possibility of financial independence where your money works for you, rather than you working solely for money. Understanding and implementing sound investment principles is what separates people who struggle financially their entire lives from those who build substantial wealth even on modest incomes. And the good news is that the fundamental concepts, while initially unfamiliar to many people, are entirely learnable and accessible regardless of your current financial knowledge level. Before we dive into specific investment strategies and vehicles, we need to address the psychological barriers that prevent many people from ever beginning to invest, because these mental obstacles are often more significant than any practical or knowledge-based barriers. The first major psychological barrier is fear, which manifests in several forms. There is fear of losing money, which is rooted in legitimate awareness that investments can decline in value, especially in the short term. There is fear of making mistakes due to insufficient knowledge or expertise, which causes people to endlessly research and prepare without ever taking action. There is fear of the unfamiliar, where the terminology, processes, and concepts of investing feel foreign and intimidating, compared to the simple familiarity of keeping money in a checking or savings account. There is fear of being scammed or taken advantage of by unscrupulous financial advisors or investment promoters. All of these fears have some basis in reality, which is why they feel so compelling and why they successfully prevent millions of people from investing who absolutely should be building wealth through investments. However, the irony is that not investing due to these fears virtually guarantees a worse financial outcome than investing imperfectly while learning and making some mistakes along the way. When you keep all your money in savings accounts earning 1 or 2% interest while inflation runs at 3 or 4% annually, you are guaranteed to lose purchasing power every single year. Your money might nominally be the same amount, but what it can actually buy steadily declines, which means you're experiencing a real loss that feels invisible because it's not reflected in your account balance. Over 20 or 30 years, inflation can cut the purchasing power of uninvested savings in half, which is a catastrophic wealth destruction that happens silently while you're congratulating yourself on being safe and avoiding the risks of investing. The second psychological barrier is the belief that investing is only for wealthy people who have large sums of money to deploy, when in reality the power of compound returns over long time periods means that consistent small investments started early are often more valuable than large investments started late. Someone who invests $200 monthly starting at age 25 will likely accumulate substantially more wealth by retirement than someone who invests $600 monthly starting at age 45, even though the second person is investing 3 times as much per month, simply because the early starter has 20 additional years of compound growth working in their favour. This is not a minor difference. It is often the difference between comfortable retirement and financial struggle in old age, and it means that beginning to invest with whatever amount you can afford right now is far more important than waiting until you feel you have enough to make it worthwhile. The third psychological barrier is the paradox of choice and complexity, where the overwhelming number of investment options, strategies, accounts, and opinions creates such decision paralysis that people never actually make any decision at all. They read articles about stocks versus bonds, active versus passive investing, growth versus value, domestic versus international, real estate versus equities, and on until their head spins, and they conclude that this is all too complicated for regular people to navigate successfully. The reality, which we will explore in detail, is that simple, straightforward investment strategies consistently outperform complex, sophisticated approaches for the vast majority of individual investors, and you can build substantial wealth using basic index fund investing that requires minimal knowledge, time, or ongoing management. Now let's establish the foundational concepts that make investment returns possible and explain why investing is not gambling, despite superficial similarities that sometimes confuse people. When you invest in a stock, you are purchasing partial ownership in a real company that employs people, creates products or services, generates revenue, and hopefully produces profits. When that company grows, becomes more valuable, and distributes profits to shareholders, your ownership stake becomes more valuable. This is fundamentally different from gambling, where you're betting on random outcomes with no underlying value creation. Over the long term, the stock market has consistently reflected the overall growth of the economy and the value creation of thousands of companies, producing average annual returns of approximately 7 to 10% after inflation over the past century, despite numerous crashes, recessions, and periods of volatility. The key phrase there is over the long term, because this is where many beginning investors make critical mistakes that sabotage their returns. Investment markets fluctuate significantly in the short term, sometimes dramatically, with individual stocks or even entire market indexes dropping 20, 30 or 50% in major downturns, which creates panic and causes inexperienced investors to sell at exactly the wrong time, locking in losses that would have recovered if they had maintained their positions. The essential discipline of successful long-term investing is maintaining your investment positions through these inevitable periods of decline, continuing to invest consistently through market downturns when assets are cheaper, and allowing the long-term upward trajectory of economic growth to compound your wealth over decades. Let me illustrate the power of compound returns with specific numbers that demonstrate why starting early and staying invested matters so profoundly. Imagine two friends, Sarah and Michael, who both want to save for retirement. Sarah starts investing $300 per month at age 25 and continues until age 65, investing a total of $144,000 over 40 years. Michael waits until age 35 to start investing, but invests $600 per month from age 35 to 65, investing a total of $216,000 over 30 years. Michael invests 50% more total money than Sarah, yet assuming both earn a 7% average annual return, Sarah will have approximately $747,000 at age 65, while Michael will have approximately $733,000. Sarah ends up with more money, despite investing substantially less, because she had 10 additional years of compound growth where her early investments were generating returns that themselves generated returns in an exponential snowball effect. This is the mathematical magic of compound returns, where time in the market is more important than timing the market or even the total amount invested. Every year you delay starting to invest is a year of compound growth you can never recover, which is why the single most important investment decision you can make is to start now with whatever amount you can afford rather than waiting until conditions feel perfect. Now, let's discuss the practical implementation of sound investment strategy for regular people building wealth over time. The approach recommended by the vast majority of financial experts for individual investors is something called passive index investing, which involves buying low-cost index funds that own small pieces of hundreds or thousands of different companies rather than trying to pick individual winning stocks. An index fund tracking the total stock market, for example, owns small portions of virtually every publicly traded company in proportion to their market size, which means you automatically own pieces of Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and thousands of other companies without having to research and select them individually. The beauty of index fund investing is that it is simple, requiring minimal knowledge or ongoing effort. It is diversified, spreading your risk across many companies so that individual company failures do not devastate your portfolio. It is low cost with annual fees typically between 0.03% and 0.2% compared to 1 to 2% for actively managed funds. It is tax efficient, generating fewer taxable events than actively traded strategies. And most importantly, it consistently outperforms the vast majority of actively managed investment strategies over long time periods. Study after study has shown that approximately 90% of professional money managers fail to beat simple index fund returns over 10 or 20-year periods, which means that the sophisticated, expensive approach usually produces worse results than the simple, cheap approach. The specific implementation of index fund investing involves opening an investment account at a reputable brokerage firm like Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab, which can be done entirely online in less than an hour. You will choose what type of account to open based on your goals and tax situation. For retirement investing, you will typically want tax-advantaged accounts like an individual retirement account or your employer's retirement plan, which provide either tax deductions on contributions or tax-free growth and withdrawals depending on the specific account type. For general wealth building beyond retirement, you will use taxable brokerage accounts where you pay taxes on investment gains but have complete flexibility to access your money at any time without penalties. Once your account is open, you select one or more low-cost index funds to purchase. For maximum simplicity, many investors use what is called a target date retirement fund, which is a single fund that owns a diversified mix of stocks and bonds automatically adjusted to become more conservative as you approach retirement age. If you retire around 2060, for example, you might choose a 2060 target date fund and simply invest all your contributions into that single fund, which handles all the complexity of asset allocation and rebalancing automatically. Alternatively, you can build your own simple portfolio using 2 or 3 index funds, perhaps a total stock market index fund for domestic stocks, an international stock index fund for global diversification, and a bond index fund for stability, allocating your money among them based on your age and risk tolerance. The general rule of thumb for stock versus bond allocation is to subtract your age from 100 or 110 to determine what percentage should be in stocks, with the remainder in bonds. A 30-year-old might have 80% stocks and 20% bonds using the 110 formula, while a 60-year-old might have 50% stocks and 50% bonds. Stocks provide higher long-term returns but with more short-term volatility, while bonds provide stability and income but with lower long-term growth. Younger investors can tolerate more volatility because they have decades for their portfolios to recover from downturns, while older investors approaching retirement need more stability to avoid selling stocks at depressed prices during market crashes. Once you have established your account and selected your funds, the critical discipline is automating regular contributions from every paycheck using the strategies we discussed in Chapter 3, and then leaving your investments alone to grow, rather than constantly checking performance, panicking during downturns, or trying to time the market by selling when you think it is too high, and buying back when you think it is low. This market timing approach feels intuitive and seems like it should enhance returns, but it consistently destroys wealth for individual investors because people are psychologically wired to do exactly the wrong thing, feeling most confident and eager to invest when markets have risen substantially and are expensive, and feeling most fearful and eager to sell when markets have crashed and assets are cheap. The way to overcome these destructive psychological tendencies is to implement what is called dollar cost averaging through automatic investing, where you invest the same amount at regular intervals regardless of market conditions. When markets are high and assets are expensive, your regular contribution buys fewer shares. When markets are low and assets are cheap, your regular contribution buys more shares. Over time, this systematic approach ensures you buy more shares at low prices than at high prices, averaging out to a favorable cost basis, without requiring you to have any special knowledge or ability to predict market movements. Chapter 10: The Long-Term Wealth Building. Blueprint: Creating Generational Financial Security. The 10th and final principle in mastering the art of saving money represents the culmination of everything we have discussed throughout this comprehensive guide, bringing together all the individual strategies, psychological insights, and tactical approaches into a cohesive long-term wealth-building blueprint that can transform not only your financial life, but potentially the financial trajectory of your entire family for generations to come. This chapter is about thinking beyond immediate financial survival or even comfortable retirement, extending your vision to true wealth building that creates options, opportunities, and security that compound across decades and can be passed on to create advantages for your children and their children. The fundamental mindset shift required for long-term wealth building is moving from a scarcity mentality focused on protecting what you have and avoiding losses to an abundance mentality focused on creating value, capturing opportunities, and understanding that wealth is not a fixed pie where someone else getting more means you get less, but rather an expanding system where creating and capturing value benefits everyone involved. This does not mean becoming reckless or abandoning the careful spending discipline and strategic saving we have discussed throughout this guide. Rather, it means operating from a foundation of confidence and possibility rather than fear and limitation, which paradoxically often leads to better financial decisions because you are thinking creatively about opportunities rather than defensively about threats. Let me begin by addressing what true wealth actually means, because there is significant confusion about this concept that leads people to pursue the wrong goals or feel dissatisfied even when they have achieved substantial financial success. Many people equate wealth with high income, assuming that earning $200,000 or $500,000 annually makes someone wealthy, when in reality income and wealth are related but distinct concepts that do not necessarily align. Wealth is not how much money you earn, it is how much money you keep and how much your assets generate in passive income or appreciation over time. Someone earning $60,000 annually, who saves and invests 30% of their income while living on $42,000, will build far more wealth over their lifetime than someone earning $200,000 annually who spends $195,000 and saves only $5,000, despite the dramatic difference in their incomes. The practical definition of wealth that matters for your financial planning is your net worth, which is the total value of everything you own, including cash, investments, real estate, and other assets, minus everything you owe in debts and liabilities. Your net worth represents your actual financial position at any given moment, and the trajectory of your net worth over time, whether it is increasing or decreasing and at what rate, tells you whether your financial strategies are working or need adjustment. Someone with a net worth of $500,000 has genuine wealth and financial security regardless of their current income, because those assets could generate passive income, could be drawn upon in emergencies, and represent years of disciplined saving and successful investing. Someone with a net worth of negative $50,000, meaning they owe $50,000 more than they own, has no wealth regardless of how high their income might be, because they are actually in a hole that must be climbed out of before wealth building can even begin. The long-term wealth building blueprint starts with calculating your current net worth, which requires making a comprehensive list of all your assets with their current values and all your debts with their current balances, then subtracting total debts from total assets. For many people, especially younger individuals or those who have struggled financially, this initial net worth calculation produces a negative number, or a very small positive number, which can feel discouraging but is actually valuable information because it establishes your baseline from which you will measure all future progress. The commitment you make is to calculate your net worth at least annually, ideally quarterly, and ensure that the number is consistently increasing over time, demonstrating that your financial strategies are successfully building wealth rather than just maintaining your current position or sliding backwards. Once you have established your current net worth baseline, the next step is setting specific long-term wealth building goals that are ambitious enough to require sustained effort and discipline, but realistic enough to be achievable given your income, expenditure, and timeline. These goals should be framed in terms of specific net worth targets at specific ages, rather than vague aspirations to be rich or comfortable. For example, you might set goals like achieving a net worth of $100,000 by age 35, $250,000 by age 45, $500,000 by age 55, and $1 million by age 65. These specific targets allow you to break down the required annual saving and investment returns into concrete action steps, rather than just hoping things work out somehow. The mathematics of wealth accumulation over long time periods reveals several powerful principles that should guide your strategy. The first principle is that wealth building accelerates over time rather than progressing linearly, meaning that the first $100,000 is far harder and takes far longer to accumulate than the second $100,000, which is harder than the third, and so on. This happens because of compound returns, where your existing wealth begins generating its own returns that add to your accumulation without requiring additional effort or saving from your income. In the early years, virtually all of your net worth growth comes from your personal savings from income. But as your investment portfolio grows, an increasing percentage of your wealth growth comes from investment returns rather than new contributions. Let me illustrate this with a detailed example using realistic numbers. Imagine someone who starts investing at age 25 with zero net worth, contributing $500 monthly to investment accounts, earning an average 7% annual return. In the first year, they contribute $6,000 and earn minimal returns because their balance is small, ending the year with approximately $6,200. In year 5, they have contributed $30,000 total, and their investments have grown to approximately $35,700, meaning investment returns have contributed only $5,700 beyond their contributions. In year 10, they have contributed $60,000, and their portfolio has grown to approximately $86,800, meaning returns have contributed $26,800. In year 15, contributions total $90,000, but the portfolio value is approximately $158,000, meaning returns have contributed $68,000, now exceeding annual contributions significantly. By year 20, this pattern accelerates dramatically. Total contributions are $120,000, but portfolio value is approximately $260,000, meaning investment returns have contributed $140,000 more than total contributions. By year 30, contributions total $180,000, but portfolio value is approximately $612,000, meaning returns have contributed $432,000, over twice the total amount personally saved. By year 40, at age 65, total contributions are $240,000, but portfolio value is approximately $1,316,000, meaning investment returns have contributed $1,076,000, over 4 times the amount personally saved. This mathematical progression demonstrates why starting early and staying invested through the inevitable market fluctuations is so crucial. The person in this example becomes a millionaire, not through extraordinary income or genius investment selection, but through consistent moderate saving of $500 monthly over 40 years, which is achievable for many middle-class workers who implement the spending optimization and income strategies we have discussed throughout this guide. The magic is not in any one year's returns, but in the compounding effect where returns generate their own returns across decades. The second powerful principle of long-term wealth building is the importance of increasing your savings rate over time as your income grows rather than allowing lifestyle inflation to consume all income increases. We touched on this briefly in earlier chapters, but it deserves deeper exploration here, because the difference between saving a constant dollar amount versus saving an increasing percentage of growing income creates dramatically different wealth outcomes. Using our previous example of someone saving $500 monthly, if their income grows by 3% annually due to raises and promotions, but they keep their monthly investment contribution fixed at $500, they will accumulate the $1,316,000 we calculated over 40 years. However, if instead they commit to saving 15% of their income regardless of how their income grows, starting with $500 monthly representing 15% of their initial income and increasing their monthly contribution by 3% annually as their income grows, their 40-year portfolio value becomes approximately $2,100,000, 60% more wealth from the same career, earning the same income simply by maintaining their savings rate as a percentage rather than as a fixed dollar amount. This is the power of avoiding lifestyle inflation and directing income growth toward wealth building rather than spending increases.